And we are back this afternoon to continue this track on LLM, AI, and APIs. And so this morning we had to talk, from open source models to production. We had to talk about securing APIs into LLM. We had the talks about LLM plugins and how you can mix your APIs with them. And we had also a talk about how you can use the new LLM stack, LangChain or Llama Index and other tools to actually interact with your LLM with your own data. But now we have a really important topic, which is licensing. You've heard probably about a lot of compliance issues or ethics issues or many other things about how we can use the data, what's the model, and actually some thought leaders are trying to tackle that problem. And for that, we are glad to have Carlos Munoz Ferrandis with us.
Hi everyone.
Hello, Carlos. We're really glad to have you. You tackle a really important topic. You are responsible. You are responsible of tech and regulatory affairs at Hugging Face. And yes, we'd love to hear more about your what you have for us on responsible AI licenses.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, first of all, for the kind invitation. So hi everyone. I'm Carlos. I'm counsel at Hugging Face. At the same time, I'm part of the group of experts on AI at the OECD, where we discuss the AI governance and regulation. And also, I've done my PhD research on open source and standards. So licensing is quite my field, let's say like this. I think you may ask yourself if you are more on the technical side of things in AI. What's the purpose of talking about licensing today? I think it has become an increasingly relevant topic in AI, basically because from a technical perspective of the dichotomy between our traditional conception of software, right? We might refer to software as code or source code. When you go into ML, you start to realize that there are several different artifacts that are not just source code. So first of all, we have data sets, right? Training data sets, data. Then we also have machine learning models, weights. So these are like new artifacts that maybe can be governed or even licensed under different uses, right? Under different licensing terms. But I think to take a step backwards, the main first point we should ask ourselves is, what's the meaning of open, right, within AI? And I think this discussion goes even beyond the licensing, right? So the discussion of openness has many different perspectives. We might refer to something open from a technical perspective when referring to a software stack, when referring to different compatible or interoperable systems. We might refer to openness from the social dimension when we speak about some open communities, such as the open source, such as free software, such as Creative Commons, right? Or even we might take the legal dimension. What do we mean by open from a legal perspective in terms of a license, right? Which types of terms should we draft to claim our tool is distributed on an open basis? And when it comes to AI, these might apply, as I was saying before, not just to source code, right? In AI, it might be the training, the inference code, model architecture, but also to machine learning models, right? So to the weights, or even to the training data sets, right? So what do we mean when we refer to opening up or that I released a large language model on an open basis or with an open license, right? Because if we go back to the software community, we see that these particular terms, such as referring to open source, are very, very specific depending on the community, right? So if we refer to open source, I know we have the open source definition steered by the open source initiative. So for instance, a responsible AI license or a source available license wouldn't be deemed an open source license according to the open source principles and the open source initiative. And same can apply to Creative Commons licenses, right? So I think it's very interesting to start to think about how do we approach licensing within either large language models or even some other components, such as datasets. And this has become a core question recently, in fact, I remember last year in 2022 when I was participating at the Big Science workshop. So Big Science workshop was an open and collaborative ML workshop. The main target of it was to explore and to develop and to train a large language model, Bloom, a multilingual one, on an open basis, right? And within this research project, we already had our discussions when it came to how were we going to license the large language model, right? Should we use maybe an Apache 2.0 license? As you may know, the Apache 2.0 license is like one of the main standards when it comes to open source and commercial or permissive open source licenses. Then you might also have the MIT license, BAD style of licenses, right? So these are the most used commercial open source licenses. And this is what we were thinking, actually. But then we realized, first of all, okay, but this license was tailored for source code. And at the same time, as a community, we have our concerns sharing this model in terms of who is going to use the model and for which purposes, right? So it was a pre-trained large language model, and we were not feeling comfortable that someone could use the model to provide medical advice or medical results interpretation. And at the same time, from a regulatory policy perspective, we were seeing that there is not such a thing as an AI regulation. And as you may know right now, within the EU, we are finishing the draft, or the EU institutions, so European Parliament, the Council, and the European Commission are finishing the draft of the EU AI Act, so a very specific or sectoral AI regulation, right? But in 2022, there wasn't such a thing. So this basically this kind of context was the trigger to a new set of license. On the one hand, we had the responsible AI licenses, such as the Bloom license, or later on I will speak about the BigCode responsible open and responsible AI license. But also not just responsible AI license, you might find other different types of licenses, such as Meta's for research purposes license, when they release their large language models, such as OPT175, SEER in the context of ML Vision, BB3 also in the context of chatbots. And then also we go even to the university context, where Tsinghua University released GLM 130 billion parameters model, also with a very specific license for research purposes for the parameters of the model, and then another license for the source code of the model. So you're starting to see how basically the community is trying to address this, let's say, not maybe problem, but this new context in terms of licensing of new type of artifacts, right? Nowadays, even if we have this type of new concepts of licenses for machine learning, still, if you go to Hugging Face and if you go to the public hub, the most used license for model repos is the Apache 2.0 license, because of course the Apache 2.0 license is the core permissive standard within official open source licenses, right? But also a lot of data sets are licensed under Creative Commons licenses, and Creative Commons licenses were conceived to promote openness and distribution of internet-related content, right? Blog posts, papers, photos shared on the internet. Now, on 2023, we are seeing not just this kind of new types of licenses, so the very tangible thing, right? But also some kind of, from a maybe more social or policy perspective, new type of movements when it comes to address this licensing challenge in AI. So we've seen the Open Source Initiative taking a step forward with their AI Deep Dive program to assess what's the place of open source within AI, and even vice versa. We also have a newly announced initiative, the Open Weights for Open Weights by Oz Capital, Heather Meeker and Joseph Jacks, if I'm not mistaken. We have also in 2023 new types of licenses, such as the BigCode Open Rail license. So basically, this license was drafted under the BigCode project. BigCode was also an open and collaborative project following the line of Big Science, where a large language model for code generation was released. Now, the license is a very specific license for the model. enabling royalty-free access and use of the model, however, establishing a set of use restrictions. And moreover, within the license, we require that, first of all, also the model, when distributed, should have a similar set of use restrictions to the original one, but also the model, and taking the inspiration from open source licenses such as the Apache 2.0, the, let's say, modified version of the original model should include not just a license, a copy of the license, but also a copy of the model card or the data card released with the original model. And why? Because what we also want to promote with this type of ML-specific licenses is transparency and documentation within the AI value chain, right? And we all know that data cards and model cards are becoming, let's say, the main standard or the documentation standard in the community when willing to document basically the essential technical features of a machine learning model, even data provenance, the technical capabilities, or even technical limitations of the model, right? So you might find all this information within a high quality model card. And this, for the potential user, is super interesting. So we thought it was very pertinent to include this within the license. So every single time the model or a modified version of the model is going to be shared or reshared, also it should be accompanied by the documentation of the original model, right? And this is something that goes closely in parallel with the emerging or upcoming AI regulations, right? So I give you here, and I won't enter into the details, one of the examples, which is, as you may know, the EU AI Act. And within the EU AI Act, specifically for either general purpose AI systems, for high-risk AI systems, or even now also for foundational models, right? Even though the AI Act is not, let's say, has not reached their final version. But for all these three types of systems, you might have a lot of compliance-related requirements. Some of them, or a lot of them, dealing with transparency and documentation. And if you go to a model card, and a high-quality model card, you realize that a lot of information asked or required by some of the articles of the EU AI Act, such as Article 13 on transparency, a lot of this information might be also found within a model card. So you have also there kind of a match between a top-down approach to the governance of AI, which is the EU AI Act, and the bottom-up approach to the governance of AI by the community, which is the model card as a documentation instrument, right? So it's very interesting to see how we can also basically, let's say, articulate responsible AI licenses in this case, or even broadly just AI-specific licenses with existing documentation tools within the community. And this is just for documentation and transparency-related purposes. But if you go, and even I will finish here, if you go to Article 4 for general purpose AI systems, if you want to commercialize general purpose AI systems, or even release a general purpose AI systems, you have to explicitly forbid the use of the system for every single one of the specified high-risk scenarios within the EU AI Act. This might be basically commercializing an AI system within the critical infrastructure context, which is an electric central, for instance, or within the job market or job applications context, within the educational context, right? So these are some examples where you should place the restrictions of the usage of your AI system. So I think one of the main, let's say, concerns right now within the EU AI Act is how we are going to achieve to play a nice intersection between open access, or even open source, open licensing broadly, right, of large language models or AI, and these use restrictions, right? Because if you take an open source license and then you take the use restrictions of the EU AI Act, so basically, you are not going to be able even to release a large language model if finally we don't have, let's say, some specific type of exceptions for open source. And this is something that it is being addressed right now within the legislative process. And it's something that could also be articulated within contractual or licensing terms of AI artifacts, right? So that's all, more or less. I know I've been maybe very quick. I don't know if you have some comments, some questions. Happy to answer them. Thank you so much.
We have one question about the open weights model from Joseph Jacks and OSS Capital. Why, to your mind, it would be critical to have, if you think, to have open weights, at least an open weights initiative?
Yeah, so I don't know if it's going to be critical as such. I think the time will tell the impact these type of initiatives are going to have. But definitely, it causes a positive impact because it really forces the AI community native, even the policymakers, to realize how to address this concern on specific type of licenses for new type of artifacts, right? And maybe open weights as such might be one of the triggers to start discussing even more these type of licensing issues.
Maybe a tough one. How we can keep the true original definition of open source with ethical license?
Oh, wow. So I think this one is a very delicate one. I can take both the personal perspective or even the Hugging Face perspective. So in Hugging Face, we are an open and neutral platform when it comes to licensing. Of course, every single user of the platform is going to be able to use or choose whatever license they want, right? So of course, we promote open source licenses. We also promote Creative Commons licenses, even source available licenses, or more specific ethical related licenses, right? So I think these type of different licensing initiatives should coexist. Now, to be clear, a responsible AI license is not an open source license, right? So an open source license is a license abiding by or respecting the core open source principles and the open source definition steered by the open source initiative. Sometimes when the license, let's say, enables open access or royalty-free access to the large language model, as it may be the Ray license, or even it may be the meta-specific licenses, right? People call this open source because open source has become a general term when referring to open access or open sharing of these type of artifacts. I think we should be careful, right? And really make the right distinctions. We, from the Rail initiative perspective and responsible AI licenses, we took inspiration from some of the open source core terms and values, but of course, our licenses from a Rail initiative hat or perspective I take right now are not open source license, just to be clear.
There recently Google Bard announced that they delayed the release in Europe because of privacy concerns and that Europe regulation have made. With the EU Act or GDPR or CCPA or PIPL in China, all the privacy regulations, do you think we will finally have territorial licenses? Like you're allowed to use it only if it's in this country or in this area?
That's a very cool point. So first of all, EU policymakers, even the European data protection supervisor, I know they are aware of this type of even licensing or commercialization of AI systems and privacy-related issues. So of course, it's a core concern, and probably this solution or just this consequence might arise. So basically, having territorial-based licenses when it comes to privacy-related regulations, right? Within the EU AI Act, it might happen even that companies are going to tailor specifically their contractual terms of their AI systems for the, let's say, compliance of the EU AI Act. And this also might take into account personal data related clauses, of course. What I can tell you also right now is that there's a debate within the EU institutions where they want, or at least the European Parliament has proposed in their last version, they have proposed that the Commission brings or defines standard contractual clauses for very specific terms in terms of compliance with the EU Act, and maybe data privacy or personal data under EU is one of them.
Yeah, one question. Are you linked by any means to the ChatGPT, $100,000 competition for, let's say, moderation, or for, let's say, I don't remember exactly what it was like.
Not me, not me.
Sorry?
I think I'm not linked. I think even I don't know about the challenge.
No, it's like, I think they are giving like $100,000 to everyone who will propose a good framework for
Oh yeah, okay, that's it. Yeah, the democratic. Yeah, so something
democracy.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, open democratic challenge. Yeah, I read about it some time ago. I no, but from my in my standing, no, I am not participating on this.
Yeah, because transparency at some point can be considered a democratic approach. Yeah, a transparent license about what's inside, how we can use it or whatever is part of democracy at some point, right?
Yeah, exactly. Sorry, just to say hello to everyone because I wasn't seeing the screen with my shared screen. Yeah, I totally agree with you, and I think so. Again, model cards, data cards are becoming the main standard when it comes to documentation and transparency within the AI community. Even you're starting to see how some companies are steering the concept of the model card from a documentation tool towards a regulatory compliance tool. You take a look at Meta's AI systems cards, or even Microsoft transparency notes, and they are doing a great job in terms of documentation of some of their AI systems. Even the documents, or let's say the information gathered within these specific cards, could be used from a compliance perspective under the EUA Act. Within Hugging Face, I can tell you I developed, co-developed with a good colleague of mine, with Nima Boscarino. Actually, he developed the tool. I am a lawyer. But we conceived together what we call RegCheck. It's a space on Hugging Face. So basically, it justifies the hypothesis of that a high-quality model card can be used for regulatory compliance with the EUA Act. So we developed a tool where the software is going to check, when you upload the model card, the compliance requirements of a specific article of the EUA Act. In this case, it's just the Article 13. It was just, kind of a demo. But in the near term, we are going to see probably more of this kind of open tooling for everyone, specifically for SMEs or even for startups that they might need it.
Last question on because we've seen your CEO of Hugging Face, like Clément Delong, at the U.S.
Yep.
Congress, talking about open source and AI. Actually, to your mind, so you are experts doing open rail, framework, but do you feel regulators, policymakers really understand what's at stake and the technology behind it to know exactly what to do?
I don't think so. I think it's such a challenge for them. I've experienced it within the discussions of the EUA Act. I think also at the same time we may criticize or not criticize or like or don't like their approach of the EUA Act, but they are taking such a courageous standing on AI. I think, of course, it's from the policymaker perspective, it's hard for them to really conceive or understand AI from a technical perspective, but also the competition or even economic dynamics of AI are even more of open source, right? So there are very different, let's say, dimensions of AI that now the policymakers are trying to address. The last version of the EUA Act, to be honest, when it comes to open source, they are really trying to address and propose a specific exception for some open source models. So this is a big step forward, to be honest. But yes, it's currently a challenge for them, in my opinion.
How we can help, contribute, support, sponsor, where we can go?
Contribute to what?
No, to contribute to the discussion, to the
Yeah,
license, to the.
yeah, of course. So you may know, all of you Hugging Face. If you are interested in some of these type of discussions, for instance, the tool I just mentioned, the regulatory check tool, if I'm not mistaken, on Spaces is called the RegCheck. I can share it with you afterwards if some of you are interested. It's an open space. So if you're interested about learning more or even developing a new version on an open basis, or just a new version for you, just open the community tab or even pick me up if you want, and we have a discussion about this licensing. I mean, I'm here, so whatever you want.
Perfect, Carlos. Thank you very much. So RecCheck or on Hugging Face or reaching you directly. Have a good one.
Thank you so
very
much.
much for